promise of the prairie dust swirled around Dahlia Morrison's skirts as she stared at the piece of paper that would determine her fate, the banker's impatient cough reminding her that time was running short, just like her options in the drought-stricken Kansas Territory of 1878. "Miss Morrison, we don't have all day," Mr. Winters said, his thin fingers drumming against his polished desk. "Your father's debts must be settled. Sign the contract, or I'll have no choice but to foreclose on your family's homestead tomorrow." Dahlia's hand trembled as she held the quill. The contract stated in clear terms that she would marry Winters' business associate, a man twice her age whom she had met exactly once in exchange for clearing her late father's $500 debt. 5 months ago, influenza had taken both her parents within a week of each other, leaving Dahlia alone with a struggling farm and debts she hadn't known existed. "This is legal?" she whispered, though she knew the answer already. "In this territory, men made the laws and men enforced them." "Perfectly." Winter's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Hargrove is a reasonable man. He needs a wife to manage his household. You need your debts cleared. A fair arrangement." Behind her, the bank door opened, bringing with it the sounds of Main Street and the scent of approaching rain. Dahlia didn't turn. She couldn't bear to have witnesses to her humiliation. "I'll need a moment," she said, not caring that Winters frowned at her delay. The drought had claimed most of their crops. The loan her father had taken to dig a deeper well had come due. Without this arrangement, she would lose everything her parents had worked for. With no relatives to turn to and few skills beyond farming, Dahlia saw no other choice. She signed her name with a flourish that belied her inner turmoil. "Excellent," Winters said, immediately reaching for the document. "Mr. Hargrove arrives from Topeka next week. The ceremony will take place immediately after." "What's happening here?" A deep voice cut through the room like a knife. Dahlia turned to see a tall man filling the doorway, his broad shoulders nearly touching both sides of the frame. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the hard set of his jaw, covered with several days' worth of stubble. He wore a duster coated with trailed dust, and a holstered pistol hung at his hip. "Nothing that concerns you, Mr. Gray," Winters said, his voice suddenly tight. "Just concluding some business with Miss Morrison here." The stranger Gray stepped fully into the bank, spurs jingling with each deliberate step. He pulled off his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and eyes that reminded Dahlia of the sky before a storm. "Dahlia Morrison?" he asked, ignoring the banker completely. "Yes," she answered, surprised he knew her name. "Griffin Gray," he said with a slight nod. "Your father's friend. I've come from Colorado." Dahlia's heart skipped. "My father never mentioned we corresponded," Griffin interrupted, his eyes flicking to the paper in Winters' hands. "What's that document?" Before Winters could react, Griffin plucked the paper from his grasp and scanned it quickly. His expression darkened dangerously. "A marriage contract to settle a debt?" His voice was quiet, but Dahlia heard the fury beneath it. "What kind of operation are you running, Winters?" The banker stood, indignation flushing his face. "This is a legal arrangement between consenting parties. Return that immediately." Griffin looked at Dahlia, his gaze softening slightly. "Did you sign this willingly, Miss Morrison?" Dahlia hesitated, aware that Winters was watching her closely. I have few options left." Griffin nodded once, as if her answer confirmed something for him. Then, in a move so swift Dahlia barely registered it, he stepped toward the small stove in the corner of the bank, opened its iron door, and tossed the contract inside. The paper curled and blackened instantly in the flames. "What have you done?" Winters shrieked, rushing toward the stove. Griffin blocked his path effortlessly. "I've just paid Miss Morrison's debt in full." He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch, tossing it onto the banker's desk. Gold coins spilled out. $500 plus interest. "Count it if you'd like." Winters stared at the gold, momentarily speechless. "Miss Morrison," Griffin said, turning to her, I'd appreciate a word with you outside. He offered his arm as if they were old acquaintances. Stunned, Dahlia placed her hand on his sleeve and allowed him to escort her from the bank. Once outside on the boardwalk, she pulled away. "Who are you really?" she demanded. "My father never mentioned any friend from Colorado." Griffin's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Your father and I weren't exactly friends, but we knew each other. I owed him a debt not of money, but of life. He saved mine once, about 10 years back. That doesn't explain why you just paid my father's loan." Griffin looked out at the dusty main street, watching as a wagon rolled past. "I received word of his passing some months ago. Came as soon as I could settle my affairs. I intended to offer assistance to his family to you." He glanced back at her. "Never expected to find you signing your life away to clear a debt." Dahlia felt a flash of indignation. "I was doing what was necessary to keep my parents' land." "I understand necessity, Miss Morrison," he said quietly. "But there are other ways." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew something small that caught the sunlight. "I'd like to offer an alternative." Dahlia gasped as he held out a simple gold band. "What is this?" "An offer," Griffin said, his voice steady despite the unexpected nature of his proposition. "Not a contract, not a business arrangement. Just an offer of marriage between equals." "You're mad," Dahlia whispered, taking a step back. "I don't know you." "You're right," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "And I don't expect an answer now. All I'm asking is that you consider it. I need a partner for my ranch in Colorado, someone strong enough to face frontier life. From what your father told me about you, and from what I've just witnessed, you seem more than capable. So I'd be trading one marriage of convenience for another?" Dahlia asked sharply. Griffin shook his head. "No. You'd be accepting a proposal from a man who respects you enough to give you a choice. Stay here on your land, which is now free and clear, or come to Colorado as my wife. Either way, the debt is paid." Dahlia stared at him, trying to make sense of this stranger who had upended her life in the span of 5 minutes. "Why would you do this for someone you don't know?" Griffin tucked the ring away and replaced his hat. "Like I said, I owed your father. And maybe I've spent too many years alone." His eyes met hers directly. "I'll be staying at the hotel for 3 days. Think about my offer. If you decide against it, the debt remains paid. No obligations." He tipped his hat and turned to leave. "Mr. Gray," Dahlia called after him. When he paused and looked back, she straightened her shoulders. "Thank you for your intervention. But don't expect me to agree to marry a stranger, no matter how gallant his rescue." For the first time, Griffin smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "I wouldn't respect you if you did, Miss Morrison. 3 days." With that, he strode away toward the hotel. Dahlia watched him go, her mind reeling. She had entered the bank prepared to sacrifice her freedom for her land. Now, somehow, she had both, at least temporarily. But who was Griffin Gray really, and what did he want from her? The sky darkened as the promised rain finally arrived, and Dahlia hurried to her wagon. She had 3 days to decide whether to trust the mysterious cowboy who had burned her contract and offered a ring instead. The following morning, Dahlia rose before dawn as usual, despite having barely slept. Her mind kept returning to the strange events at the bank and the even stranger man who had inserted himself into her life. After feeding the chickens and milking her only remaining cow, she sat on the porch of the small farmhouse, watching the sun rise over the fields her father had painstakingly cleared. The land looked different somehow. Yesterday, she had viewed it as a burden, something she was desperately trying to hold on to out of obligation. Today, knowing it was truly hers, free and clear, she could see its potential again. A movement along the road caught her attention. A rider approached, and even at a distance, she recognized Griffin Gray's broad-shouldered silhouette. Dahlia straightened her work dress and smoothed her hair, annoyed at herself for caring about her appearance. He dismounted at the gate, leading his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, up the path to the house. "Good morning, Miss Morrison," he called, removing his hat. In the clear morning light, she could better see his features, strong but not harsh, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of both smiles and squinting into the sun. She guessed him to be in his early 30s, perhaps 10 years her senior. "Mr. Gray," she acknowledged. "I wasn't expecting visitors." "I thought you might have questions," he said simply. "And I wanted to see the land your father was so proud of." Dahlia's curiosity got the better of her caution. "How did you know my father?" "Truly?" Griffin leaned against the porch railing. "I was a cavalry scout during the war. After, I drifted west. Got caught in a blizzard near the Colorado-Kansas border in '68. Your father found me half frozen, brought me here, and nursed me back to health. I would have been 12, Dahlia said, trying to recall. "I don't remember you." "You wouldn't. I was delirious with fever for days. Your mother kept you away from me, afraid I carried disease." His expression softened. "When I recovered, your father refused payment. Said it was what any decent man would do. But before I left, he showed me a letter from his brother in Boston, a photograph of you. Told me you were the bravest, smartest child a man could hope for." Something about the specific memory rang true. Dahlia remembered her uncle sending a daguerreotype that year. "We corresponded occasionally after that," Griffin continued. "Nothing regular. A letter every year or so. When I finally established my own ranch, I wrote to tell him. His reply mentioned your mother's health was failing. That was 2 years ago. She was never strong after the fever that winter," Dahlia said quietly. "Father worried himself sick over her, and then they both caught influenza." Griffin nodded. "I'm sorry. He was a good man." "So you came all this way because of a decade-old debt of gratitude?" Dahlia asked, still skeptical. Griffin's eyes met hers directly. "Partly. And partly because in his last letter, your father mentioned he was concerned about leaving you alone if anything happened to him. He worried about the farm, the drought, the loan." Dahlia felt a surge of emotion, grief for her father, anger that he'd confided in a stranger rather than her. "He never told me about the loan. He wouldn't have wanted to worry you." They were silent for a moment, the only sounds the clucking of chickens and the occasional snort from Griffin's horse. "And your proposal?" Dahlia finally asked. "Was that also part of your debt to my father?" Griffin smiled slightly. "No. That was entirely my own idea, admittedly impulsive, but sincere." "You don't know me," Dahlia pointed out. "I know enough," he countered. "I know you're loyal to your family's legacy. I know you're brave enough to make hard choices. I saw how you held yourself in that bank, proud even when cornered." His perception unsettled her. "And what do I know of you? That you're wealthy enough to carry $500 in gold, that you own a ranch in Colorado, and that you make hasty marriage proposals to women you've just met." Griffin laughed, a surprisingly warm sound. "Fair points all. Would you like to know more?" Despite herself, Dahlia was curious. "I suppose I should, considering your offer. My ranch is near Pike's Peak. 2,000 acres, mostly for cattle. I have a good herd of Herefords, about 500 head. The main house is substantial, 6 rooms, with glass windows and a proper kitchen. 3 hired hands live in a bunkhouse nearby." He paused. "It's beautiful country, Miss Morrison. Different from Kansas, more mountains, of course, but fertile valleys. Good water." "And you've built all this yourself?" "I started with almost nothing 10 years ago," he acknowledged. "Got lucky with some mining investments, used the profits to buy land when it was cheap. Worked hard." He gestured to her farm. "Not unlike what your father did here." Dahlia studied him, trying to reconcile the successful rancher before her with the desperate man her father had rescued from a blizzard. "Why aren't you already married, Mr. Gray? Surely there are plenty of women in Colorado who would be interested in a prosperous rancher." His expression sobered. "I was engaged once before the war. She married someone else while I was fighting. After that, he shrugged. I focused on building something lasting. Recently, I realized I had no one to share it with, no one to leave it to. So you need an heir, Dahlia concluded. I need a partner, he corrected. Someone who understands what it means to build something from nothing. Someone who values land and what it can provide. He met her gaze directly. I won't pretend romance enters into it, Miss Morrison. But I believe we could build a good life together, based on mutual respect and common goals. His honesty was refreshing after Winter's manipulations. Still, Dahlia wasn't ready to commit to anything. I appreciate your frankness, Mr. Gray. But I need time to think. Of course. He settled his hat back on his head. May I call again tomorrow? Dahlia hesitated, then nodded. I would like to hear more about Colorado. As Griffin mounted his horse, he paused. One more thing, Miss Morrison. Regardless of your decision about my proposal, I'd like to help you with the spring planting. I notice your fields haven't been turned yet. Dahlia bristled. I can manage my own farm. I'm sure you can, he said easily. But an extra pair of hands never hurts. Consider it a neighbor's assistance, nothing more. Before she could form a retort, he tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Dahlia to contemplate the fields that desperately needed attention. Pride warred with practicality as she watched his retreating figure. The man was right, she did need help with the planting, especially if she decided to stay. But accepting his assistance felt like the first step toward accepting his proposal, and Dahlia wasn't sure she was ready for that journey. That afternoon, as Dahlia struggled to repair a broken fence post, she heard the now familiar sound of hoofbeats approaching. To her surprise, it wasn't Griffin but rather the town's young doctor, Daniel Wilson, who rode up her lane. Miss Morrison, he called, dismounting. I heard about yesterday's events at the bank. Are you all right? Dahlia put down her hammer and wiped her hands on her apron. News travels fast. It's a small town. Dr. Wilson said with an apologetic smile. Everyone's talking about how the stranger from Colorado paid your debt and burned the contract. I'm fine, Dahlia assured him. Mr. Gray was unexpectedly helpful. Dr. Wilson's expression grew serious. That's actually why I came. Do you know anything about this man? His background? His character? He claims to have known my father, Dahlia said. Says my father once saved his life. And you believe him? Dahlia considered the question. He knew details that would be difficult to fabricate. Why do you ask? Dr. Wilson hesitated. It's just unusual, isn't it? A stranger arriving with exactly the amount needed to clear your debt, then immediately proposing marriage? Dahlia stiffened. How did you know about the proposal? Mrs. Tate at the hotel mentioned he purchased a ring from her late husband's collection yesterday morning, before going to the bank. The doctor shifted uncomfortably. She assumed, and then when I heard about what happened at the bank. You came to warn me. Dahlia finished for him. I appreciate your concern, Dr. Wilson, but I'm capable of making my own decisions. Of course, he said quickly. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just that since your parents passed, many of us in town feel a certain responsibility toward you. You're alone here, and yet none of you stepped forward when Winters was about to force me into marriage with a man old enough to be my father, Dahlia pointed out, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Dr. Wilson had the grace to look ashamed. We didn't know. By the time word spread, it was already resolved. Dahlia softened slightly. The young doctor had always been kind, attending her parents in their final days without pressing for payment he knew she couldn't provide. Thank you for your concern, she said more gently. But I haven't accepted Mr. Gray's proposal. I'm still considering my options. Options? Dr. Wilson perked up. You mean you might stay in Riverside? I might, Dahlia acknowledged. Now that the debt is cleared, I could try to make the farm profitable again. That would be wonderful news, he said, his enthusiasm evident. The community needs families like yours, people with roots here, with history. Dahlia studied him, wondering if there was more to his interest than community welfare. Dr. Wilson was handsome in a bookish way, with kind eyes and gentle hands. In another life, perhaps she might have encouraged his attention. But the harsh realities of frontier life had left little room for such considerations. "Was there something else you needed, Doctor?" she asked when he made no move to leave. He cleared his throat. "Actually, yes. I was hoping you might consider selling some of your eastern acreage. The town is growing, and we need to expand the cemetery. Your land adjoins it and would be ideal." Dahlia's eyebrows rose. "You're offering to buy part of my farm?" "The town council would pay a fair price," he assured her. "It could provide you with enough capital to invest in new equipment, seeds, perhaps hire help." The proposal was surprisingly practical. The eastern acres were the least fertile of her land, and the money would indeed help her establish independence. "I'll consider it," she said. "How much land does the town need?" They discussed details for several minutes, with Dr. Wilson promising to have a formal offer drawn up. As he prepared to leave, he hesitated once more. "Miss Morrison, Dahlia, I hope you'll be cautious with Mr. Gray. Sometimes when things seem too good to be true, they usually are," she finished. "I'm well aware, Doctor." After he rode away, Dahlia returned to the fence, but her mind wasn't on the task. The doctor's warning had stirred doubts she was already harboring. Why would a successful rancher want to marry a woman he barely knew? What if this was all an elaborate scheme to acquire her land? Yet Griffin had already paid her debt with no guarantees. If land was his aim, there were simpler ways to acquire it. As sunset painted the prairie in gold and crimson, Dahlia sat on her porch steps, turning the puzzle over in her mind. The fence remained unrepaired, a physical reminder of all the tasks she couldn't manage alone. Tomorrow, she decided, she would ask Griffin Gray more pointed questions. If he truly wanted her as a partner, he would need to be completely transparent about his intentions and his past. The next morning brought Griffin back to her farm, this time with unexpected additions. Behind his horse he led a sturdy plow horse and a wagon containing tools and supplies. "What's all this?" Dahlia asked as he approached the house. "I mentioned helping with your spring planting," Griffin said, dismounting. "Thought you might need proper equipment." Dahlia surveyed the wagon's contents: seed potatoes, corn seed, a new plow blade, and various tools. "These aren't loans from neighbors." "No," he admitted. "I purchased them in town this morning." "I can't accept such gifts," Dahlia said firmly. "Especially while your proposal remains unanswered." Griffin nodded, unsurprised by her response. "Then consider them an investment in this farm, regardless of your decision about Colorado. You can repay me after harvest if you choose to stay." It was a reasonable compromise, but Dahlia still hesitated. "The doctor visited yesterday. He seems concerned about your sudden appearance in my life." "Dr. Wilson?" Griffin's expression revealed nothing. "What exactly concerns him?" "That I know very little about you," Dahlia said bluntly. "That your generosity might have hidden motives." Griffin leaned against the porch railing, apparently untroubled by her directness. "Ask me anything, Miss Morrison. I have nothing to hide." Dahlia studied him, then nodded toward the fields. "Walk with me first. I want to show you something." They crossed the yard and followed a path through last year's cornfield, now just stubble awaiting the plow. Beyond it lay a small rise, and when they crested it, the land opened before them, rolling prairie stretching to the horizon, dotted with the first wild flowers of spring. "My father brought me here the day they claimed this land," Dahlia said, gazing out at the view. "I was 5 years old. He lifted me onto his shoulders and said, 'This is our piece of America, Dahlia flower. We'll make it bloom.'" Griffin remained silent, sensing there was more. "They worked themselves to death for this land," Dahlia continued. "Through droughts and blizzards, grasshopper plagues and fever outbreaks. They never gave up." She turned to face Griffin directly. "So when you offer marriage as casually as some men might offer a dance, you must understand my hesitation. There was nothing casual about my proposal, Griffin said quietly. Impulsive, perhaps, but not casual. Then help me understand, Dahlia pressed. Why me? The truth, Mr. Gray. Griffin took a deep breath, his eyes on the distant horizon. When I first came west, I was running from the war, from what I'd seen, what I'd done. Your father didn't just save my life physically, he reminded me that good people still existed. He paused. Over the years, his letters described this place, and how you grew from a spirited child into a woman with her own mind. How you could outwork any farmhand and still find beauty in a prairie sunset. He met her gaze. When I learned of his death, I came because I felt I owed it to him to check on you. I had no intention of proposing marriage when I arrived in town yesterday. But then I saw you in that bank, about to sacrifice yourself, and something just clicked. I recognized in you the same spirit I've been trying to embody since your father saved me: resilience, integrity, strength. You don't even know me, Dahlia protested, though with less conviction than before. I know enough to recognize a kindred spirit, Griffin said simply. The rest we could learn together. If you choose. His honesty disarmed her. And if I choose to stay here instead? Then I'll help you make this spring's planting, ensure you have what you need to succeed, and return to Colorado alone. His expression remained steady. Your choices are your own, Miss Morrison. I'm merely offering an alternative to the solitary path ahead of you. They stood in silence as a meadowlark called from a nearby fence post, its clear notes carrying across the open land. I should see to those supplies, Griffin finally said. The seed potatoes need to be cut and prepared if we're going to plant them tomorrow. Tomorrow? Dahlia questioned. Unless you have other plans? There was a hint of challenge in his voice. Despite herself, Dahlia smiled. I suppose I could make time in my busy social calendar. The unexpected lightness in her tone surprised them both, and Griffin's answering smile transformed his face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. I'll be here at dawn, he promised. As they walked back toward the house, Dahlia made a decision. Mr. Gray, would you care to stay for dinner? Nothing fancy, just rabbit stew and biscuits, but it might give us a chance to continue our conversation. Griffin looked genuinely pleased. I'd be honored, Miss Morrison. Dahlia, she corrected. If we're to discuss potentially spending our lives together, you might as well use my given name. Griffin, he returned with a nod. And I'm a fair hand at biscuits, if you'd allow me to contribute. The unexpected domesticity of the offer made Dahlia pause. Perhaps there was more to this man than she had initially assumed, and perhaps it was worth her time to find out exactly what. True to his word, Griffin arrived at dawn the next day, bringing with him not only the supplies from the previous day but also a young man he introduced as Pete, one of his ranch hands who had accompanied him from Colorado. Hope you don't mind the extra help, Griffin said as he unloaded the wagon. The weather looks promising, and I thought we might try to get as much ground prepared as possible today. Dahlia couldn't reasonably object. The work ahead was substantial, and with 3 people, they might accomplish in a day what would have taken her a week alone. They worked steadily through the morning, Griffin and Pete handling the heavy plowing while Dahlia prepared the seed potatoes they had cut the evening before. By midday, they had made significant progress on the main field. As they paused for a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and cold cider, Pete regaled Dahlia with stories of Griffin's ranch. You should see the main house, Miss Morrison, the young man enthused. Mr. Gray built most of it himself. There's even indoor plumbing in the kitchen pipes that bring water right inside. Dahlia raised her eyebrows at Griffin. You didn't mention such luxuries. Griffin looked slightly embarrassed. It's a practical addition, not a luxury. Saves time carrying water, especially in winter. And the library? Pete continued. Must be 100 books in there. Mr. Gray reads every night before bed, even after working from sunup to sundown. This detail intrigued Dahlia more than the plumbing. You're a reader? Griffin nodded. My mother was a schoolteacher before she married. She insisted I receive an education, even on the frontier. He took a sip of cider. What about you? Your father mentioned you were fond of books. My mother had a small collection. Dahlia acknowledged. I've read each one dozens of times. She glanced toward the house. They're among my most precious possessions. Which is your favorite? Griffin asked. Wordsworth's poems. Dahlia answered without hesitation. His descriptions of nature. They remind me of the prairie. Griffin's eyes lit with genuine interest. I have several volumes of poetry you might enjoy. Wordsworth, but also Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson. Pete chuckled. See what I mean? Regular scholar, the boss is. They returned to work after lunch, and Dahlia found herself watching Griffin as he guided the plow through the rich earth. He worked with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to physical labor, efficiently directing both the horse and his own movements. Occasionally, he would stop to examine the soil, crumbling it between his fingers with an expert's assessment. By late afternoon, they had prepared a significant portion of her main field. As Pete led the plow horse to water, Griffin approached Dahlia, who was marking rows for the following day's planting. You have good land here, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Rich soil. With proper care, it should yield well. If the rains come, Dahlia qualified. They will, Griffin said with the quiet confidence that seemed to characterize him. I checked the almanac, spoke with some old-timers in town. All signs point to a wet spring. Dahlia found his certainty oddly comforting. Thank you for today's help. We've accomplished more than I could have hoped. We're not finished yet, Griffin said, nodding toward the broken fence she had been attempting to repair. That's our next task. You don't have to, I know, he interrupted gently. But I want to. Partners help each other, Dahlia. The use of her name, spoken with such quiet assurance, sent an unexpected warmth through her. She nodded, unable to form a suitable response. They worked on the fence until sunset, with Pete joining them after tending to the horses. By the time darkness fell, the fence was solid again, the field was prepared, and Dahlia felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths. As Griffin and Pete prepared to leave, Dahlia impulsively said, I'm going into town tomorrow to discuss selling some acreage to the town council. Perhaps we could meet afterward? I'd like to continue our conversation. Griffin's expression brightened. I'd like that. Shall I meet you at the cafe around noon? Dahlia nodded, then added, and please bring Pete again the day after. If your offer of help with planting still stands. It does, Griffin assured her. And Dahlia. He hesitated, then continued, I've enjoyed today. Regardless of what you decide about Colorado. As she watched them ride away in the gathering dusk, Dahlia realized with some surprise that she had enjoyed the day too, not just the progress on the farm, but the company. Griffin Gray was unlike any man she had met before, educated yet practical, confident yet respectful of her independence. For the first time since receiving his proposal, Dahlia allowed herself to seriously consider what life as his wife might entail. Not as a desperate alternative to destitution, but as a genuine partnership between equals. The possibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next morning, Dahlia dressed in her best, a dark blue cotton dress with minimal adornment, practical but flattering. She rarely went into town these days, finding the pitying glances of neighbors more difficult to bear than solitude. As she drove her wagon toward Riverside, she rehearsed what she would say to the town council about the cemetery expansion. Dr. Wilson had suggested 5 acres, but Dahlia was prepared to negotiate for a higher price per acre. The meeting went more smoothly than anticipated. The council members, perhaps feeling guilty about not intervening with Winters, were generous in their offer. By 11:30, Dahlia had signed the papers transferring the 5 acres and received a bank draft that would indeed provide enough capital to sustain the farm through harvest. With time to spare before meeting Griffin, Dahlia decided to visit the general store to purchase a few necessities. As she selected fabric for new curtains, a small luxury she could now afford, she overheard two women talking in the next aisle. "Living out there alone with a strange man visiting every day," one said in a hushed voice. "It's not proper." "Well, I heard he paid her debt at the bank," the other replied. "Probably expects payment of another sort now. My husband says he's been asking questions all over town about the Morrison farm. Wanting to know about water rights, property boundaries. Sounds like he's more interested in the land than the lady, if you asked me." Dahlia froze, the bolt of fabric clutched in her hands. The women's words confirmed her earlier suspicions, the ones she had begun to dismiss after spending time with Griffin. "Dahlia." Mrs. Henderson, the shopkeeper, approached with a smile. "I haven't seen you in ages. How are you, dear?" The conversation in the next aisle abruptly ceased. "I'm well, thank you," Dahlia replied, struggling to maintain her composure. "Just picking up a few things." "I heard about that business at the bank," Mrs. Henderson said, lowering her voice. "Terrible how Winters tried to take advantage. Thank goodness that handsome rancher stepped in." Dahlia managed a tight smile. "Yes, quite fortunate. He seems like a fine man. Been in here several times, always polite, generous with his purchases." Mrs. Henderson leaned closer. "Between us, dear, you could do worse. Men like that are rare on the frontier." "I should go," Dahlia said, setting down the fabric. "I just remembered another errand." She hurried from the store, her thoughts in turmoil. Why would Griffin be asking about her property boundaries and water rights unless he had designs on her land? His story about owing her father could be completely fabricated, a way to gain her trust. By the time she reached the cafe, Dahlia had worked herself into a state of righteous indignation. She spotted Griffin immediately, seated at a corner table, his broad shoulders distinguishing him from the other patrons. He stood when he saw her, a smile warming his face. "Dahlia," he greeted her. "How was your meeting with the council?" "Successful," she replied stiffly. "They've purchased the acreage for the cemetery expansion." Griffin gestured to the chair across from him. "That's excellent news. Please join me. I've taken the liberty of ordering coffee." Dahlia remained standing. "Actually, Mr. Gray, I'd prefer we speak privately. Perhaps we could walk." Something in her tone alerted him to her mood, and his expression grew serious. "Of course." They exited the cafe and walked in silence until they reached a small park at the edge of town. When they were sufficiently isolated from potential eavesdroppers, Dahlia turned to face him. "I understand you've been asking questions about my property," she said without preamble. "Water rights, boundaries. Why?" Griffin appeared genuinely surprised by her directness. "I have," he acknowledged. "I wanted to understand what you're working with the farm's potential, its challenges. And why would that matter to you, unless you have designs on acquiring it?" Dahlia demanded. Understanding dawned in Griffin's eyes. "You think I'm trying to swindle you out of your land?" "The thought has occurred to me," Dahlia admitted. "You appear suddenly after my parents' deaths, pay my debt, propose marriage within minutes of meeting me. Now I learn you've been investigating my property." Griffin's expression shifted from surprise to something more complex, disappointment mingled with resignation. "I suppose it does look suspicious from your perspective. Then explain it," Dahlia challenged. Griffin sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign he was gathering his thoughts. "When your father saved my life 10 years ago, I was at my lowest point," he began. "The war had left me hollow. I'd drifted west with no purpose beyond escaping memories." He met her gaze directly. "During the weeks I spent recovering at your farm, your father and I talked extensively. About the land, about building something lasting, about finding meaning after loss." He gestured to the surrounding countryside. "I fell in love with this territory during that time, not specifically your farm, but the promise of the prairie. When I eventually moved on to Colorado, it was with your father's advice ringing in my ears: find good water, good soil, and put down roots. And you succeeded, Dahlia said, less accusatory but still wary. I did, Griffin acknowledged. Because of what your father taught me. He paused. When I learned of his death, I came to pay my respects and to see if his daughter needed assistance. I had no intentions beyond that. Until you saw me in the bank, Dahlia supplied. Until I saw a woman with the same spirit as the man who saved me, Griffin corrected. As for the questions about your property, yes, I've been asking. Because I wanted to know if you were being cheated by Winters, if there were other claims against your land I could help resolve, if the water situation was as dire as rumored. His frankness was disarming. And what did you learn? Dahlia asked, her anger beginning to fade. That your father was respected but not always prudent in his financial decisions. That your eastern water rights are solid but the western acres are vulnerable during drought. That the farm could be profitable with proper investment and management. Griffin replaced his hat. All information that would be useful whether you chose to stay here or come to Colorado with me. Dahlia studied him, trying to discern any hint of deception. Finding none, she felt a flicker of shame at her quick judgment. I apologize for my accusations. No need, Griffin said quietly. Caution is wise, especially for a woman alone on the frontier. I would expect nothing less from Jacob Morrison's daughter. The mention of her father softened Dahlia further. He would have liked you, I think. Properly, I mean not just as the stranger he rescued. Griffin's smile returned, warming his features. I hope so. He hesitated, then added, Dahlia, my offer stands both the help with your farm and the proposal. But I understand your hesitation now more than ever. Dahlia nodded, her thoughts still tumultuous but clearer than before. I appreciate your patience. And your honesty. They walked back toward town in companionable silence, the afternoon sun warming the spring air around them. As they neared the main street, Griffin spoke again. Would it help to see Colorado before deciding? To visit my ranch, meet my people, judge for yourself whether it could be a home for you? The suggestion was unexpected but intriguing. You'd take me all the way to Colorado and back, just so I could make an informed decision? I would, Griffin confirmed. We could leave after your planting is complete. The journey takes about a week each way. You'd be back in plenty of time for your harvest. Dahlia considered the proposal. A journey to Colorado would indeed give her a clearer picture of what Griffin was offering. It would also give her more time to assess his character away from the whispers and judgments of Riverside. Let me think about it, she said finally. After the planting is done. Griffin nodded, apparently satisfied with this response. That's fair. As they reached her wagon, he added, Pete and I will be at your farm at dawn tomorrow, as promised. The potatoes should go in first, while the soil is still cool. I'll be ready, Dahlia assured him. As she drove home, Dahlia's mind was occupied not with the women's gossip or even Griffin's explanation, but with the unexpected possibility of seeing the mountains. She had never traveled more than 20 miles from Riverside. The idea of such a journey, regardless of its purpose, was both frightening and exhilarating. By the time she reached her farm, Dahlia had made a decision. She would accept Griffin's offer to visit Colorado. Not as a commitment to marriage, but as an opportunity to expand her horizons beyond the prairie that had always been her home. And perhaps, just perhaps, to discover whether the connection she was beginning to feel with Griffin Gray could develop into something more meaningful than a practical partnership. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. With Griffin and Pete's help, Dahlia completed her spring planting more efficiently than ever before. The potatoes were carefully nestled into the prepared soil, followed by corn, beans, and a small kitchen garden near the house. Each day, Dahlia found herself looking forward to Griffin's arrival. Their conversations flowed more easily as they worked side by side, discussing everything from farming techniques to favorite books. She learned that he had fought for the Union during the war, serving as a cavalry scout in Tennessee and Georgia. He spoke of his ranch with evident pride but also acknowledged its challenges: harsh winters, occasional conflicts with neighboring ranchers over water rights, the isolation of frontier life. In turn, Dahlia shared stories of her childhood on the prairie, her mother's illness, her father's unwavering optimism even during the worst droughts. Griffin listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed his attention to detail and his respect for her experiences. By the end of the second week, when the last of the seeds were in the ground and the spring rains had indeed arrived to nurture them, Dahlia found herself reluctant to see the daily routine end. "I suppose your work here is finished," she said as they stood on her porch, watching a gentle shower water the newly planted fields. "For now," Griffin agreed. "The crops are in, the fences repaired, the well cleaned." He glanced at her. "Have you considered my offer to visit Colorado?" Dahlia nodded. "I have. And I accept." Griffin's expression brightened. "You won't regret it. When would you like to leave? How soon could we depart?" Dahlia asked, surprising herself with her eagerness. "I need to finalize some business in town tomorrow," Griffin said. "We could leave the day after, if that's not too soon." "What about my farm while I'm gone?" "Pete can stay behind," Griffin suggested. "He's capable and trustworthy. He can keep an eye on things, make sure the crops get any attention they need." It was a sensible solution. With the planting complete, there would be relatively little to do until harvest, mainly keeping an eye out for pests and ensuring the irrigation channels remained clear if the rain stopped. 2 days, then, Dahlia agreed. "I'll need to pack and make arrangements." Griffin smiled, the expression reaching his eyes and revealing that charming dimple she had noticed before. "I look forward to showing you Colorado, Dahlia. I think you might find it suits you." As he rode away, Dahlia wondered if he was right. Would the mountains call to her as the prairie did? Would Griffin's ranch feel like a place she could belong? Most importantly, could she envision a future there with him? She had just over a week of travel to find out. The morning of their departure dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for beginning a journey. Dahlia had packed sparingly 2 dresses besides the one she wore, practical undergarments, her mother's silver hairbrush, and a small volume of Wordsworth's poems. Everything fit into a single carpet bag, a testament to the simplicity of her life on the prairie. Griffin arrived with a light wagon drawn by 2 sturdy horses, different from his usual mount. "More practical for the journey," he explained. "Smoother ride, and we can carry provisions." Pete helped load Dahlia's bag and a crate of supplies for the trip. "Don't you worry about a thing, Miss Morrison," he assured her. "I'll take good care of your place while you're gone." After a final inspection of the house and barn, Dahlia was ready. She climbed onto the wagon seat beside Griffin, surprising herself with her lack of apprehension. 2 weeks ago, the idea of traveling alone with a man she barely knew would have been unthinkable. Now, it felt almost natural. "Ready?" Griffin asked, his voice gentle. Dahlia nodded. "Ready." They set off westward, following the main road out of Riverside. As they passed through town, Dahlia noticed curious glances from the few people on the street that early. By nightfall, she knew, speculation about her departure with Griffin would be the main topic of conversation. Strangely, the thought didn't bother her as much as it once might have. Whatever happened in Colorado, she would return with a broader perspective than those who had never ventured beyond the county line. The first day's travel was uneventful, covering familiar territory. They made good time on the well-maintained roads, stopping at midday for a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. Griffin was a thoughtful traveling companion, pointing out interesting landmarks and giving Dahlia control of the reins when she expressed interest in driving. As evening approached, they reached a small town where Griffin had arranged rooms at the local hotel. After a substantial dinner in the hotel's dining room, Dahlia retired early, tired from the day's journey but excited about what lay ahead. The following days established a comfortable routine. They would rise with the sun, breakfast quickly, and be on the road by the time the dew was drying. Griffin knew the route well, avoiding difficult terrain when possible and choosing good camping spots on the nights when no town was within reach. During their 4th night on the trail, camped beside a small creek, Dahlia found herself opening up to Griffin in a way she hadn't with anyone since her parents' deaths. "I sometimes wonder what my life would have been if they hadn't died," she confessed, gazing into the campfire. "If I would have eventually married a local boy, had children, lived my entire life within sight of Riverside's church steeple." Griffin, seated across the fire, considered her words. "Do you think you would have been happy with that life?" "I don't know," Dahlia admitted. "I loved my parents deeply, and I love our farm. But sometimes I felt confined. Like there was a whole world out there I would never see." She gestured to the star-filled sky above them. "Now here I am, further west than I've ever been, about to cross into Colorado territory. Does it frighten you?" Griffin asked. "The unknown?" Dahlia thought about it. "Less than it should, perhaps. Or maybe just differently than I expected." She met his gaze across the flames. "I'm not afraid of the journey, or the mountains, or even the idea of your ranch. I'm afraid of making the wrong choice. Of looking back in 20 years and wondering what if." Griffin nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I've had those moments. After the war, I could have returned to Illinois, taken up my father's trade as a blacksmith. Sometimes I wonder about that other life, the one where I never came west." "Do you regret your choice?" "Never," Griffin said with certainty. "The West has its hardships, but there's a freedom here I couldn't find back east. Room to breathe, to build something that's truly your own." He added another log to the fire. "That's what I want to show you in Colorado, Dahlia. Not just my ranch, but the possibility of a life shaped by your own choices, not by circumstances or others' expectations." His words resonated deeply with Dahlia. Wasn't that what she had always wanted? Not just security or comfort, but agency, the freedom to determine her own path. "Thank you for that," she said softly. "For understanding." Griffin's smile was warm in the firelight. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we cross into Colorado territory, and the day after, we'll reach Pikes Peak. The real beauty begins then." As Dahlia settled into her bedroll, she realized that somewhere along the journey, her perception of Griffin had fundamentally shifted. He was no longer the mysterious stranger who had burned her contract, nor even the potential husband whose offer provided an escape from hardship. He had become something else entirely, a companion whose presence she valued for its own sake. It was a realization both comforting and unsettling as she drifted into sleep beneath the vast prairie sky. Griffin hadn't exaggerated about the beauty of Colorado territory. As they traveled deeper into the region the following day, Dahlia found herself constantly amazed by the changing landscape. The flat prairie gradually gave way to rolling hills, and by late afternoon, the distant mountains were clearly visible, massive, snow-capped sentinels rising majestically against the horizon. "Pikes Peak," Griffin said, nodding toward the most prominent of the mountains. "My ranch lies in one of the valleys about 20 miles from its base. It's magnificent," Dahlia breathed, unable to take her eyes off the view. She had seen illustrations of mountains in books, but nothing had prepared her for their actual scale and grandeur. "Wait until tomorrow," Griffin promised. "When we get closer, you'll see how the sunlight changes the colors of the rock throughout the day. Sometimes the peaks look purple, sometimes gold." They camped that night within sight of the mountains, and Dahlia found it difficult to sleep, anticipation for the next day's journey keeping her awake long after Griffin had fallen into the steady breathing of slumber. The following morning brought them into increasingly varied terrain, pine forests interspersed with open meadows bursting with wildflowers, streams that ran clearer and colder than any Dahlia had seen in Kansas. The air felt different, too crisper, carrying the scent of pine and something else she couldn't quite identify. "Sage," Griffin explained when she mentioned it. "It grows wild throughout these foothills." By mid-afternoon, he was pointing out landmarks with increasing frequency, his excitement evident as they approached his land. "That ridge marks the eastern boundary of my property," he said, indicating a rocky outcropping ahead. "Once we cross it, we'll be able to see the ranch house." As their wagon crested the ridge, Dahlia gasped at the vista that opened before them. A lush valley stretched below, bisected by a winding stream that gleamed silver in the afternoon sun. Nestled against the base of a smaller mountain was a substantial log house much larger than Dahlia had imagined, with several outbuildings arranged nearby. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing on the valley floor and horses in a corral near the house. "Griffin, it's beautiful," she said sincerely. His expression was a mixture of pride and what appeared to be relief. "I hoped you would think so." He clicked to the horses, and they began the descent into the valley. As they approached the house, a tall, gray-haired man emerged from one of the outbuildings, followed by a younger man and woman. They waited by the main house as Griffin guided the wagon into the yard. "Welcome home, boss," the older man called. "Started to wonder if you'd gotten lost in Kansas." Griffin laughed as he set the brake and jumped down from the wagon. "Not lost, Sam, just took my time." He turned to help Dahlia down, his hands steady at her waist. "Miss Dahlia Morrison, I'd like you to meet my foreman, Sam Rutledge. And this is Tom Finch and his wife, Maria. They help run the place when I'm away." Dahlia nodded to each in turn, suddenly self-conscious about her travel-worn appearance. "It's a pleasure to meet you all," she said, smoothing her skirts. "The pleasure's ours, Miss Morrison," Sam replied, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "We've heard a lot about you from the boss." "All good things, I hope," Dahlia said, glancing at Griffin. "Nothing but," Maria assured her, stepping forward. She was a pretty woman around Dahlia's age, with dark hair and kind eyes. "Come inside. You must be exhausted after your journey. I've prepared the guest room and heated water for a bath." The mention of a proper bath after days of travel was so welcome that Dahlia nearly sighed with relief. "That sounds wonderful." As Maria led her toward the house, Dahlia heard Griffin instructing the men about unloading the wagon and caring for the horses. It was clear from their easy interaction that they respected him and were accustomed to working together efficiently. The interior of the ranch house exceeded Dahlia's expectations. The main room was spacious, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and comfortable-looking furniture arranged on a large woven rug. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that made Dahlia itch to examine their titles. Large windows let in ample light, and she noticed curtains that softened the otherwise masculine space. "This is lovely," Dahlia said, genuinely impressed. "Mr. Gray has built a good home here," Maria agreed. "When Tom and I first came, it was much rougher, just the center portion, with a dirt floor. He's added to it each year." She led Dahlia to a small but pleasant bedroom off the main hall. A brass bed with a colorful quilt stood against one wall, beside a chest of drawers with a mirror above it. A window overlooked a small garden at the side of the house. "The bath will be ready shortly," Maria said. "I'll bring it in here, if that's all right. Then perhaps you'd like to rest before dinner?" "That would be perfect," Dahlia agreed. "Thank you for your kindness." Once alone, Dahlia moved to the window, taking in the view of the garden and, beyond it, the sweep of the valley leading to the mountains. It was undeniably beautiful, different from the open prairie she had always known, but with its own kind of majesty. Could she imagine herself here, in this house, in this valley? For the first time since Griffin's proposal, the possibility seemed not just practical but appealing. After bathing and changing into her cleanest dress, Dahlia felt refreshed and curious to explore more of the house. She found Griffin in what appeared to be a study, reviewing papers at a substantial desk. He looked up when she entered, his face brightening. "You look rested. I hope the accommodations are comfortable?" "Very," Dahlia assured him. "Your home is impressive, Griffin. More than I expected. It's been a decade in the making," he said, setting aside his papers. "When I first staked my claim, there was nothing but a crude shelter for the first winter." He gestured to the comfortable room around them. "All of this came later, bit by bit. Like my parents' farm," Dahlia observed. "Exactly," Griffin agreed. "Would you like a tour of the rest of the property before dinner? I'd be happy to show you around." For the next hour, Griffin led Dahlia through the ranch, from the well-equipped barn to the bunkhouse where the hands stayed, to the corral where several fine horses watched their approach with interest. He explained the operation with evident pride: the breeding program for the horses, the careful selection of Hereford cattle for their hardiness, the irrigation system that brought water from the stream to the kitchen garden and nearby fields. "Most of our income comes from the cattle," Griffin explained as they walked. "But the horses are a growing part of the business. The army buys several each year for the cavalry." Dahlia listened attentively, impressed by the thought and planning evident in every aspect of the ranch. Unlike her family's farm, which had developed somewhat haphazardly over the years, Griffin's operation showed careful design and foresight. "And you manage all this yourself?" she asked as they made their way back toward the house. "Sam helps with the day-to-day operations when I'm away," Griffin said. "He's been with me almost from the beginning. Came west looking for a fresh start after the war, same as me. Tom and Maria joined about 3 years ago. We have a few seasonal hands during calving and roundup, but otherwise it's just us." "It's remarkable what you've built," Dahlia said sincerely. Griffin paused, turning to face her directly. "Thank you. But it's still missing something important." "What's that?" Dahlia asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "A family," Griffin said simply. "Someone to build it with, to share it with. Someone to leave it to someday." His eyes held hers steadily. "I meant what I said in Kansas, Dahlia. I'm looking for a partner, not just a wife." Before Dahlia could formulate a response, Maria called from the house that dinner was ready. The moment passed, but Griffin's words lingered in Dahlia's mind throughout the evening meal, a pleasant affair with all 5 of them gathered around the large table in the dining room. The conversation flowed easily, with Sam sharing stories of the ranch's early days and Maria asking polite questions about Dahlia's journey. There was a warmth to the interaction that reminded Dahlia of meals with her parents, a sense of belonging that she had missed desperately since their deaths. As she prepared for bed that night, Dahlia found herself drawn once more to the window. The moon had risen, bathing the valley in silver light that transformed the landscape into something almost magical. In the distance, the mountains stood as dark silhouettes against the star-filled sky. It was beautiful, undeniably so. Different from her beloved Prairie, but with its own powerful appeal. Could she be happy here? Could she build a life with Griffin, in this house, in this valley? For the first time, Dahlia allowed herself to imagine it fully: mornings waking to this view, days spent working alongside Griffin to improve the ranch, evenings in the comfortable main room with books and conversation. Children, perhaps, running in the yard or riding their first ponies under their father's watchful eye. The vision was surprisingly easy to conjure, and surprisingly appealing. With that thought, Dahlia climbed into the comfortable bed, her mind more settled than it had been in months. She hadn't made her decision yet. There was still much to learn about Griffin and this place, but for the first time, she could clearly see the possibility of a future here. Not as an escape from hardship, but as a deliberate choice for something promising and new. The next week passed quickly as Dahlia immersed herself in life at Griffin's ranch. Each day brought new experiences and insights, both about the operation itself and about the man who had created it. She spent mornings with Maria, learning about the particular challenges of maintaining a household in this remote location. The other woman was a patient teacher, showing Dahlia the root cellar where vegetables were stored through the winter, the smokehouse where meat was preserved, and the methods they used to make supplies last between infrequent trips to the nearest town. "It was harder before the railroad came through," Maria explained as they kneaded bread dough together. "Now Mr. Gray can get supplies from Denver more regularly. But you still need to plan carefully." "How far is the nearest neighbor?" Dahlia asked, realizing she hadn't seen any other dwellings in the valley. "About 5 miles that way," Maria said, nodding toward the east. "The Andersons. Good people, with children about the same age as our little ones." "Your children?" Dahlia hadn't seen any youngsters around the ranch. Maria smiled. "They're staying with my sister in town while they attend school. They'll be home for the summer in a few weeks." She gave Dahlia a knowing look. "They'll be curious about you. We don't get many visitors, especially not ladies." Dahlia felt herself blush. I'm just here to see the ranch, to understand what Griffin's life is like here. Of course, Maria said, though her expression suggested she understood more than Dahlia had said. It's a good life, if you don't mind the isolation. And Mr. Gray is a fair employer, a good man. In the afternoons, Griffin would take Dahlia riding, showing her parts of his property too distant to walk to the higher pastures where the cattle grazed in summer, the pine forest that provided timber for building and firewood for winter, the crystal-clear lake fed by mountain springs. During these rides, their conversations ranged widely. Griffin spoke of his dreams for the ranch, expanding the horse breeding program, experimenting with new feed crops, perhaps eventually building a larger house farther up the slope for better views of the valley. Dahlia, in turn, shared more about her life in Kansas, her mother's lessons in household management, her father's innovative farming techniques, her own quiet dreams of perhaps someday continuing her education beyond what had been available in Riverside's small school. You could study whatever interested you, Griffin said when she mentioned this desire. Denver has bookshops, libraries. We're not so far from civilization that learning becomes impossible. His easy inclusion of her in his future plans, the casual "we" didn't escape Dahlia's notice. Nor did the fact that she was beginning to think in similar terms. On their 5th day at the ranch, Griffin took her to a special spot, a small plateau halfway up the mountainside that overlooked the entire valley. They dismounted, leaving the horses ground tied to graze on the lush grass, and walked to the edge where a flat rock formed a natural seat. "This is my thinking place," Griffin admitted as they sat side by side. "When decisions need making or problems need solving, I come here." Dahlia could understand why. The view was spectacular, the entire ranch laid out below them like a map, the stream winding through it catching the afternoon sun, the distant mountains providing a majestic backdrop. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "So different from Kansas, but beautiful in its own way." Griffin nodded. "That's what I thought when I first saw it. Different from Illinois, different from Tennessee where I fought, different from anywhere I'd been. But somehow it felt right." He glanced at her. "Do you miss the prairie?" Dahlia considered the question honestly. "Yes and no. I miss the openness, the way you can see the weather coming from miles away. The way the grass ripples like water when the wind blows." She gestured to the scene before them. "But this has its own kind of magic. The mountains make me feel sheltered somehow. Protected. That's how I've always felt here." Griffin agreed. "Like the mountains stand guard." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, watching an eagle soar above the valley. Finally, Griffin spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "Dahlia, you've been here nearly a week now. You've seen the ranch, met the people, experienced a little of what life is like here." He turned to face her. "I promised not to press you for an answer about my proposal, and I won't. But I would like to know what you're thinking." It was a fair question. Dahlia had been contemplating little else during her time in Colorado. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that I can see why you love it here. Why you've worked so hard to build this place." She met his gaze directly. "I'm thinking that I could be happy here, with you." Griffin's expression brightened, but she held up a hand to stop him from speaking. "But I'm also thinking that marriage is a lifelong commitment, and while I've learned much about your ranch, I'm still learning about you." She smiled to soften her words. "And you're still learning about me." Griffin nodded, accepting her point. "What would help you decide? More time?" "Perhaps," Dahlia acknowledged. "But also—" She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Also some understanding of how you see me fitting into your life here. Would I be a partner in the ranch's operations? Would I have a say in decisions? Would we face challenges together, or would you expect me to focus solely on household matters?" These were questions she hadn't felt comfortable asking in Kansas, when the proposal seemed more like a rescue than a genuine offer of partnership. But here, seeing Griffin in his element, understanding the scope of what he had built, they felt essential. Griffin appeared to give her questions serious consideration. "I see you as a full partner," he said finally. Your experience with farming would be valuable here. Different terrain, but many of the same principles apply. As for decisions," he smiled slightly, "I'm accustomed to making them alone, but I'm not opposed to consultation. I value good sense, and you seem to have that in abundance." His answer pleased her. "And if I had ideas for changes or improvements, I'd listen," Griffin promised. "Can't guarantee I'd always agree, but I'd listen." Dahlia nodded, satisfied with his response. "One more question, then. A personal one." "Ask anything," Griffin invited. "Why me?" Dahlia said simply. "You're successful, respected, not unattractive." She felt herself blush at the admission. "You could have your choice of women, yet you traveled all the way to Kansas to propose to someone you barely knew. Why?" Griffin's gaze turned toward the distant mountains, and for a moment, Dahlia thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "After the war, I was damaged. Not physically, but inside. I'd seen too much death, caused too much of it." He glanced at her. "Your father saw that in me, I think. He didn't just save my body from the blizzard. He helped save my soul by reminding me that good people still existed, that building was better than destroying." Griffin shifted slightly, turning more fully toward her. "Over the years, his letters often mentioned your strength, your intelligence, your ability to find joy even during hard times. When I received word of his death, I felt I owed it to him to check on you." His expression softened. "But when I saw you in that bank, ready to sacrifice yourself to save your parents' legacy, I recognized something in you that I've been seeking my whole life, a spirit that matches my own." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I proposed because in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that you were the kind of woman I wanted beside me, not just managing a household, but building a life. Strong enough to endure frontier hardships, brave enough to face whatever comes, and kind enough to make a house into a home." His words stirred something deep within Dahlia, a recognition that what he described wasn't just flattery but a genuine assessment of who she was, who she had always tried to be. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing me so clearly." Griffin's hand tightened slightly around hers. "Does that answer your question?" "It does," Dahlia acknowledged. "Better than I expected." They sat together on the mountainside until the sun began to dip toward the western peaks, hands still joined, sharing the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other a little better than before. As they rode back to the ranch house, Dahlia felt a growing certainty about her future. She hadn't given Griffin her answer yet, that would come soon enough, but in her heart, she knew what it would be. On their final night at the ranch, Griffin hosted a small gathering, inviting the Andersons from the neighboring property to join them for dinner. Dahlia appreciated meeting another family, particularly Mrs. Anderson, who eagerly shared information about the women's social circle that gathered monthly in the nearest town. "It's not exactly Boston society," Mrs. Anderson laughed, "but we manage to keep civilized out here. We have a small lending library, a quilting circle, even occasional musical evenings." The conversation was lively, and Dahlia found herself laughing more than she had in months. As the evening progressed, she noticed Griffin watching her interact with their neighbors, a pleased expression on his face. After the Andersons departed and the others had retired for the night, Griffin invited Dahlia to join him by the fire in the main room. They sat in comfortable chairs facing the hearth, where flames danced over the remains of the evening's logs. "Did you enjoy meeting the Andersons?" Griffin asked. "Very much," Dahlia replied. "They seem like good neighbors." "They are," Griffin agreed. "John helped me raise the barn when I first expanded, and Emily has been kind to Maria, including her in the women's gatherings in town." Dahlia nodded, her mind already turning to practical matters. "How often do you go to town for supplies?" "Every few weeks during good weather," Griffin said. "Less often in winter, when the passes can be snowed in." He tilted his head, studying her. "Why do you ask?" "Just trying to understand the rhythms of life here," Dahlia explained. In Riverside, we were in town at least weekly for church, supplies, social calls. It's more isolated here, Griffin acknowledged. That's one of the challenges of ranch life. Does it concern you? Dahlia considered the question. Not concern, exactly. It's an adjustment I would need to make. She met his gaze directly. One of many, I suspect. Griffin leaned forward in his chair, his expression earnest. Dahlia, I know I promised not to press you for an answer until we return to Kansas. But tomorrow we begin our journey back, and I find myself impatient. Dahlia couldn't help smiling at his admission. Impatient? The man who built this ranch over a decade is suddenly unable to wait a few more days? Griffin's answering smile was sheepish. It seems that way, yes. His honesty deserved her own. Dahlia took a deep breath, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. I don't need a few more days, Griffin. My time here has shown me everything I needed to see. His expression grew serious, watchful. And what conclusion have you reached? That I would be proud to be your wife, Dahlia said simply. To build a life with you here, to be your partner in this beautiful place you've created. The joy that spread across Griffin's face was immediate and transformative. He rose from his chair and knelt before hers, taking both her hands in his. Are you certain? He asked, his voice husky with emotion. It would mean leaving your farm, your home. My home will be where we build it together, Dahlia said with growing confidence. The farm in Kansas holds my past. I think Colorado holds my future. Griffin reached into his pocket and withdrew the simple gold band he had offered her in Riverside. Then, Dahlia Morrison, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? This time, when she looked at the ring, Dahlia saw not an escape route but a promise, a symbol of the partnership they would forge together. Yes, she said, extending her left hand. I will. Griffin slipped the ring onto her finger, then raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The tenderness of the gesture brought unexpected tears to Dahlia's eyes. We should return to Kansas for the wedding, she said as Griffin rose and returned to his chair. I would like to be married in my parents' church, with what friends I have there as witnesses. Of course, Griffin agreed readily. And it will give you time to decide what to bring back with us, what arrangements to make for your property. They discussed practical matters for a while longer, the timing of their return journey, how long they would stay in Kansas, what belongings Dahlia wanted to transport to Colorado. Throughout the conversation, Dahlia was struck by Griffin's attentiveness to her preferences and his willingness to accommodate her wishes. As the fire burned down to embers, Dahlia found herself stifling a yawn. It's late, Griffin observed. We should both get some rest before tomorrow's journey. As they stood, he hesitated, then stepped closer to her. May I? He asked softly. Understanding his intention, Dahlia nodded, her heart suddenly racing. Griffin leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle but unmistakably passionate. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch warm and sure. Dahlia responded instinctively, her hands resting lightly on his chest as she returned the kiss with growing confidence. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Griffin's eyes were darker than she had ever seen them. I've wanted to do that since I saw you stand up to Winters in his bank, he admitted, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I'm glad you waited until now, Dahlia replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. It's much more appropriate to kiss one's fiancé than a stranger. Griffin laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Always practical, Miss Morrison. Mrs. Gray, soon enough, she corrected, enjoying the way his expression brightened at her words. Soon, he agreed, stepping back reluctantly. Good night, Dahlia. Good night, Griffin. As she made her way to her room, Dahlia touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. She had entered into their engagement with clear-eyed practicality, seeing it as a partnership built on mutual respect and common goals. But the flutter in her heart suggested that something more was developing between them, something that went beyond practical considerations. Something that, given time and nurturing, might grow into the kind of deep affection her parents had shared. The prospect was both exciting and slightly terrifying as Dahlia prepared for bed. But as she drifted toward sleep, the golden band on her finger catching the moonlight from the window, she felt more certain than ever that she had made the right decision. The journey back to Kansas passed more quickly than the trip to Colorado, perhaps because Dahlia now viewed it as a temporary departure rather than an unknown adventure. She and Griffin traveled comfortably together, their conversation flowing easily as they discussed plans for their future. Upon reaching Riverside, they found Pete had maintained the farm admirably in Dahlia's absence. The crops were thriving, the animals healthy, and the house clean and welcoming. "You've done an excellent job," Dahlia told the young man as they inspected the fields together. "Better than I could have hoped." Pete beamed at her praise. "It was no trouble, Miss Morrison. Good land practically takes care of itself with a little attention." News of their engagement spread quickly through the small town. Some, like Dr. Wilson, expressed surprise at the speed of their courtship. Others, particularly those who had witnessed Winter's attempted manipulation, seemed relieved that Dahlia had found a more agreeable solution to her difficulties. Mrs. Henderson at the general store was among the first to offer congratulations. "I knew he was sweet on you from the moment he started asking about Jacob Morrison's daughter," she said with satisfaction. "A man doesn't ride all that way just to repay an old debt." Winters, when they encountered him on Main Street, merely tipped his hat stiffly and continued on his way. His scheme thwarted, he seemed to have no further interest in Dahlia or her property. The wedding was arranged for the following Sunday, allowing time for Dahlia to settle her affairs and prepare for the move to Colorado. The town's small church would host the ceremony, with the minister's wife organizing simple decorations of wildflowers and ribbon. In the days leading up to the wedding, Griffin proved himself an attentive fiancé, helping Dahlia sort through her parents' belongings to decide what to take and what to leave behind. Together, they visited the cemetery where her parents were buried, and Dahlia was touched by the respect Griffin showed as he stood silently beside her at their graves. "Your father would be pleased, I think," Griffin said as they walked back toward the wagon. "To know you found someone who values both you and the land he loved." "I think so too," Dahlia agreed, slipping her hand into his. "Though he might have insisted on a longer courtship." Griffin chuckled. "Probably. Most fathers would." On the morning of their wedding day, Dahlia stood in her childhood bedroom, gazing at her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. She wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her taller frame. The simple white gown, with its high collar and delicate lace trim, suited her perfectly. Mrs. Henderson and the minister's wife had helped her prepare, arranging her hair with sprigs of baby's breath and assuring her that she made a beautiful bride. Now they had gone ahead to the church, leaving Dahlia a few moments of solitude before the ceremony. A soft knock at her bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. "Dahlia?" Griffin's voice called. "Are you decent? I have something for you." "You're not supposed to see the bride before the wedding," Dahlia protested, though she moved toward the door. "It's bad luck." "I won't look," Griffin promised. "Just open the door a crack." Curious, Dahlia complied, opening the door just enough to peer out. True to his word, Griffin stood with his back to the door, dressed in a fine black suit she hadn't seen before. "Hold out your hand," he instructed. Dahlia extended her hand through the narrow opening, and Griffin placed something cool and metallic in her palm. When she drew her hand back and opened it, she gasped. It was a locket gold, intricately engraved with a flowering vine pattern. When she pressed the tiny clasp, it opened to reveal two small photographs, one of her parents on their wedding day, the other of her farm in Kansas. "Griffin," she breathed, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "How did you?" "Mrs. Henderson had the photograph of your parents," Griffin explained, still facing away from the door. "And I took the other one myself, the day before we left for Colorado. I wanted you to always have a piece of your home with you." Tears pricked Dahlia's eyes. "It's perfect." "Thank you. There's one more space in the locket," Griffin added. I thought perhaps someday we might add a photograph of our new home. Or of our family, when the time comes. This simple statement of faith in their future together moved Dahlia deeply. Impulsively, she opened the door wider and reached out to touch his shoulder. "Turn around," she said softly. "But the tradition is less important than this moment," Dahlia finished for him. Griffin turned, and his expression as he saw her in her wedding dress was everything Dahlia could have hoped for: wonder, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart beat faster. "You are beautiful," he said simply. Dahlia smiled through her tears. "And you are the kindest man I have ever known, Griffin Gray." He reached out to brush a tear from her cheek, his touch gentle. "Save some of those tears for the ceremony. People will think I've made you unhappy if you arrive at the church already crying." Dahlia laughed, the sound brightening the moment. "These are happy tears, I assure you." Griffin's expression grew serious. "Are you certain about today, Dahlia? About coming to Colorado? It's not too late to change your mind." The question, asked on the threshold of their wedding, demonstrated once again his concern for her happiness above his own desires. It confirmed what Dahlia already knew, that she had chosen well. "I have never been more certain of anything," she said firmly. "Now go, before the whole town decides we've both disappeared." Griffin's smile returned, warming his features. "I'll see you at the church, then." He leaned forward and pressed a quick, gentle kiss to her forehead before turning to leave. As Dahlia fastened the locket around her neck, her fingers trembling slightly with emotion, she felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. She was leaving the farm that had been her childhood home, but she wasn't leaving behind the values her parents had instilled in her: courage, integrity, the importance of building something lasting. Instead, she was carrying those values forward into a new life, with a man who shared them. A man who had burned a contract that would have bound her unwillingly, and offered instead a ring that represented genuine choice and mutual respect. The church was filled with familiar faces when Dahlia arrived. As there was no family member to give her away, Dr. Wilson had offered to escort her down the aisle, a gesture of community support that touched Dahlia deeply. At the altar, Griffin waited, his expression a mixture of joy and reverence as she approached. When Dr. Wilson placed her hand in Griffin's, the connection felt both symbolic and deeply real, a joining of lives that had begun with an impulsive proposal but had grown into something meaningful and true. The ceremony itself was simple, the minister's words traditional yet heartfelt. When it came time to speak their vows, Griffin's voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving Dahlia's as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life. When it was Dahlia's turn, she spoke clearly, her voice carrying to the back of the small church as she made the same promises. As Griffin slipped the gold band onto her finger, the same ring he had offered her that day outside the bank, Dahlia felt the circle of their unusual courtship complete itself. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Griffin's kiss was gentle but possessive, a public declaration of their new relationship that left Dahlia slightly breathless when they finally parted to the sound of applause from the congregation. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, held in the church hall with food contributed by various townspeople. There was music from a local fiddler, dancing, and many well wishes from people who had known Dahlia since childhood. As the afternoon waned, Dahlia found herself standing beside Griffin, watching the festivities with a sense of contented disbelief. 6 weeks ago, she had faced the prospect of a loveless marriage to clear her father's debt. Now she was embarking on a new life with a man she had come to respect deeply and, she admitted to herself, to care for in a way that went beyond practical considerations. "Happy?" Griffin asked quietly, his hand finding hers. Dahlia nodded, squeezing his fingers. "Very. Though a little overwhelmed by how quickly everything has changed." "Good changes, I hope," Griffin said, a hint of uncertainty in his tone. Dahlia turned to face him fully, wanting him to see the sincerity in her eyes. "The best kind. You've given me a future I couldn't have imagined, Griffin. Not just security or a home, but a partnership. A chance to build something meaningful together." Griffin's expression softened. You've given me the same gift, Dahlia. For years I've built my ranch without knowing exactly what purpose it ultimately served beyond my own satisfaction. Now I know. What purpose is that? Dahlia asked. To be a home, Griffin said simply. Not just a place, but a life shared. Something lasting that extends beyond either of us. His words resonated deeply with Dahlia, articulating feelings she had only begun to recognize in herself. Before she could respond, Mrs. Henderson approached, clearly having overheard their exchange. Such beautiful sentiments, the older woman said with approval. You two remind me of Dahlia's parents when they first arrived here, full of dreams and determination. She patted Dahlia's arm affectionately. Jacob and Mary would be so happy for you, dear. So proud of the woman you've become. As Mrs. Henderson moved away to join another group, Dahlia felt tears threaten again. Griffin noticed immediately. What is it? He asked, concern evident in his voice. I just wish they could have been here, Dahlia admitted. To see this day. Griffin's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer to his side. They are here, in a way. In the values they instilled in you, in the memories this community holds of them. His free hand touched the locket at her throat. And they'll be with us in Colorado too, in the things you bring from this place, physical objects, yes, but more importantly, the spirit they fostered in you. His understanding comforted Dahlia as nothing else could have. Thank you, she whispered, leaning against him briefly before straightening. Now, I believe tradition dictates that we should dance at our own wedding. Griffin's smile was warm as he offered his arm. Mrs. Gray, I would be honored. As they moved to the center of the hall, where other couples were already dancing to a lively tune, Dahlia reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her to this moment. From the desperate young woman signing a marriage contract to clear a debt, to the bride dancing with a husband she had chosen freely, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. Yet it wasn't miracle but choice that had brought her here. Griffin's choice to intervene that day in the bank, and her own choice to consider his unexpected proposal. Choices made with courage and hope, despite uncertainty. Choices that had opened a door to possibilities she had never imagined. As Griffin's arms encircled her in the dance, Dahlia felt the last of her reservations dissolve. Whatever challenges lay ahead in their life together in Colorado, they would face them as partners, with mutual respect and growing affection to sustain them. The contract that would have bound her unwillingly had burned to ashes. In its place, she had accepted a ring offered freely, and with it, a future bright with promise. 3 years later, Dahlia stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Griffin taught their 2-year-old son, Jacob, to feed a gentle old mare an apple from his small palm. The child's delighted laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the sounds of ranch life, horses nickering in the corral, cattle lowing in the distance, the rhythmic chopping of wood as Sam prepared for the approaching winter. The ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship. Griffin's knowledge of cattle and horses combined with Dahlia's farming experience had resulted in expanded crops, increased herds, and improvements to the property that benefited everyone who lived and worked there. Dahlia's hand rested on her swollen belly, where their second child, a daughter, she was certain would arrive before Christmas. The years had brought challenges, of course, a difficult first pregnancy, a harsh winter that claimed some of their cattle, occasional disagreements about the direction of their enterprise. But they had faced each difficulty together, as the partners they had promised to be. And somewhere along the way, the practical partnership Griffin had initially proposed had blossomed into a deep and abiding love, one built on shared values, mutual respect, and the daily choice to build something lasting together. As if sensing her thoughts, Griffin looked up from his lesson with Jacob and caught her eye across the yard. His smile, still capable of making her heart skip after 3 years of marriage, spoke volumes. Dahlia returned the smile, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the locket she still wore daily. Inside, alongside the photographs of her parents and her Kansas farm, a third image had been added: Griffin holding newborn Jacob, his expression one of wonder and profound joy. The Prairie girl who had signed a marriage contract out of desperation had found her home in the mountains, with a man who had burned that contract and offered a ring instead. Not as a business arrangement, but as an invitation to partnership, to growth, to love. It was, Dahlia reflected as her husband and son crossed the yard toward her, the best choice she had ever made.